Good morning.
Good morning.
Amen.
Beautiful day it is outside.
Oh, yes, praise God.
Nice and warm. And Brother Elam, would you collect the Sunday school offering, please? The last couple of weeks we've been talking about what major topic? Do you remember? The Jewish betrothal period, dealing with the Jewish wedding. How many parts do you remember how many parts the Jewish marriage actually has? It has two parts. It has the marriage supper, which is at the marriage ceremony, which is the second half. And then you have the betrothal period, which is the first half. And that's what we're looking at and investigating. Is the betrothal period between a bride and a bridegroom. And we talked about how not just anyone goes and selects the bride, but the father goes out and selects the bride for his son, or the son might have some input. And as we're looking and relating that to us in Christ, we realize we haven't chosen Christ, but He's chosen us.
Yes, praise God.
And when we look at everything that God's doing in the pagan world, we find that there's chaos, there's confusion, there's disorder. But with everything that we're investigating, we see that God is making a statement saying, that's not the way things are supposed to be. I'm not a God of confusion. But rather, while one may go off in chaos and disorder in the world, in my place, there is order. There is stability. It's not randomness. But rather, everything works perfectly together. And it's not coincidence. But everything works out for those who love God.
Amen. Praise the Lord.
And when we also looked at that, and I realize I'm going back a little bit farther, but it's taking a little bit more time. But we also talked about in this order that God establishes in the Jewish customs, we find that in that no one is forced into marriage either. In a pagan world, someone might be tricked into marriage. But in God's world, both parties must consent. Did anyone memorize the memory verse for last week? If not, would someone go ahead and read that, please? Mark chapter 14 and verse 23. Mark 14:23.
And he took the cup, and when he gave his thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank.
That was our memory verse for last week. Our memory verse for this week is found in James chapter 1 and verse 17. James 1:17. If someone wants to go ahead and read that.
Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow nor turn, no shadow of turning.
Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above,
Praise God.
and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Before we continue on to today's lesson, I just want to touch on one last thing. Do you remember what we talked about last week? We talked about the cup of the covenant. Can anyone tell me what happens when they partake of this cup of the covenant? Can anyone tell me what I wouldn't say tradition, but what ordinance we follow in the Bible that relates to it. I'll give you a hint, it's not the washing of feet. It's communion. And when we look at communion, there's so much more to it than meets the eye. Yes, we remember what Christ did for us. We realize that for us as a bride, we also need to look at it from a different point of view as well. And realize when he talks about, this is my blood, and the New Testament, we have to realize not only is he talking about our dowry, the price that was paid, the blood, but he's also reminding us of the covenant or our marriage contract in the same breath for us, which is the New Testament. All the promises that God gave us in the New Testament make up the church's marriage contract. Now today we're going to go a little bit farther, and we're going to talk about the gifts for the bride. When we look at the betrothal period, it wasn't just the bridegroom and the bride standing there and signing a marriage contract. It wasn't just the bridegroom creating the contract. And neither was it just taking of the covenant. But the bridegroom actually gave gifts to the bride at that point in time. If someone would please find Genesis 24, verse 53, Genesis 24, 53, and someone else, Luke chapter 15, verses 8 to 9. Genesis 24, 53, and Luke 15, 8 and 9. As we look at this gift giving, we find that it could be sometimes any object of value. It was a way for the bridegroom to express his love for his bride. This was different from the dowry. It was also separate. But he came and he gave her gifts. Some brides received a coin or several coins. Others received some object of great value. I remember when we were getting married that I got Sister Beth one of the biggest volumes you could get of the Mariah Carey perfume. That's what she liked, so that was my gift to her. She won't let me tell the price. It was a really good price, but it was a gift nonetheless. But does someone have Genesis 24 and 53?
And the servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and gave them to the widow. And he gave also to her brother and to her mother precious things.
Here we have the account of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. And he brings to Rebekah and her family gifts for her, in order for her to go and marry Isaac. How about Luke chapter 15, verses 8 and 9?
Either one woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece that does not light a candle, sweep the house and seek diligently till she find it. And when she had found it, she called her friends and her neighbors together, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I had lost.
Here we have the parable of the lost coin. And the reason it was so special was it wasn't just a series of coins for this woman, but was her dowry. On her wedding day, she would put them around her veil to show that she was now to be complete with her husband. But not only that, if she had lost one, it meant that she was going to be careless with the gifts that her husband gave her. How could she be trusted with anything else if she cannot keep intact that one thing which should be so precious and dear to her? I need you to do me a favor, Sister Beth. I forgot to write it down. Can you please find the verse in Genesis 24 that speaks of the 10 camels on which Eliezer came on? So the bridegroom would give gifts to the bride, and they would be precious things. As times and traditions changed a little bit, the Jews eventually took on what Western society uses for an engagement. They went from being just coins, silver, gold, anything, any such thing, but today, the traditional marriage gift to enter into a betrothal period is a ring. And it's very similar to what we would consider an engagement ring. That's what they use to become betrothed. And when the bridegroom places the ring upon the finger of his bride, he places it upon the index finger of her index finger, and he recites, if you want to say, I ring or no, it's a traditional formula, but it's basically a saying. And when he places it upon her finger, he says this, Be thou consecrated unto me. Basically, with this ring, you are mine. You are no one else's. You are to set yourself completely and wholly aside for me. As times changed later on, the phrase went from being, Be thou consecrated unto me, and later in history, the phrase, according to the law of Moses and Israel, was added. Why is this important that it was added? The Jews do not accept the New Testament. They go by the Old Testament. That is their Torah. And when we go back to Moses and the law, when he came down off of Mount Sinai and presented the law, that was God's marriage contract with Israel. So they are looking back to that time when Israel got wed. And they are including that phrase, according to the law of Moses and Israel. After some time as well, as I've already said, the traditional gift changed from being gold, silver, coins, or whatever, into being a traditional ring. So the phrase went to being added, having this phrase added as well. By means of this ring. Today, the traditional phrase, when a man places the ring upon a woman, states in its entirety, Be thou consecrated unto me, according to the law of Moses and Israel, by means of this ring. And as I've already stated, today the gift is typically a diamond engagement ring. It is something of precious value. The church may not have God giving down a giant wedding ring with this big old diamond on it, but He gave us something much more precious. If someone would go ahead and read Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, Acts 2, 1 through 4, and we'll find God handing down the betrothal gift to the church. Acts 2, 1 through 4. Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 4.
The day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues as of under fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance.
There we have what I called when we were studying a little back with the study of the Holy Ghost was the Pentecostal passage. It was God giving the Holy Ghost down to the church. We don't have an engagement ring, but rather God gave us something much more precious and much more valuable. He gave us the Holy Ghost. He said that He shall no longer be with you, but He shall be in you. There is a turning point there in that passage. It's not just God empowering the church, but giving her her betrothal gift. And when we look on at this, the gift itself never speaks of itself. Brother Vince, you can give someone that big old diamond rock,